Geoffrey is a longtime teacher in the Delaware Valley branch, and he has taught classes and workshops around the world, and also spent 25 years as an RSCDS examiner before retiring a few years ago. Uh, in particular, I really appreciate his thoughtful consideration of how we teach Scottish country dancing and the ways that we might need to modify our approach to various generations of new dancers or potential of interest level. So with that, Geoffrey, why don't we take it away? Hand it
All
over to
right.
you.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Mort, kind words, and thank you all for coming out to hear these thoughts. As you can see, the title of this presentation is Rethinking Recaps, What Works Today? And the two takeaways I would hope you would come away with from this presentation. The first is what I think of as a paradigm shift in how we think about recaps and who they're really for and how they should be delivered so that they are serving our dancers today. And then in the second part of the presentation, I'll make a lot of specific suggestions about how to make them more helpful. The impetus for this presentation happened about 12, 15 years ago in the very room you see pictured here. This is Younger Hall, the music hall in St. Andrews, where the RSCDS Summer School gathers for evening dances and some classes. And they gather usually on the first night of summer school and again on Thursday and sometimes even the Saturday night. This photo does not show the night I'm referring to. It's just a picture of this beautiful hall with its incredible sprung wooden floor and excellent acoustics, so you always have great music. And on the particular occasion I'm thinking about, it was the first night of a summer school, and I was slated to teach the very advanced class the next morning. And unfortunately, I had an Achilles tendon injury. And so I was up in the gallery, which you can't see here, and was just watching. Wanted to be down dancing, of course. And looking down, it was a veritable United Nations. There was a huge crowd from Japan, another from France, another from Germany, and of course, large groups from North America and the UK. But there were also contingents from Spain, Belgium, Netherlands, Russia, Hungary. It was really quite amazing. And later in the week, when I was teaching the intermediate class, I realized there was a large group of relatively inexperienced dancers who had come to summer school. What interested me on this first night, and it was quite an easy program, is that the person who was emceeing was kind of known as a minimalist who gave the ultra brief recap with just the fewest possible words. And I was curious how that would play out. And the answer is it didn't play out all that well. There was a lot of chaos on the dance floor. And even on dances like The Machine Without Horses and Mrs. McLeod, things that I assumed most of the people would know, but there was just a lot of chaos. And then later in the week, on the Thursday night, when there was the same summer school, same hall, a different MC who gave somewhat more expansive and I thought more helpful recaps. Although the program was quite a bit more difficult than that first night, it went much, much better. And I just, watching those two nights, realized the recaps made a huge difference. The other impetus for this presentation was a letter in the Scottish Country Dancer magazine. It was from October 2022. It's quite a long letter, and I'm not going to read all of it. I'm just going to read the first two sentences. The title put in there by the editor was RSCDS Obsession with Teaching. And this writer says the following: Dear editor, Olaf Olafsson, chairman of the Teachers Association of Scotland, which we all know as TAS, recently encouraged RSCDS teachers to review how they conduct their classes. He was responding to remarks made to him to the effect that the RSCDS spent most of its resources, human and financial, on teaching people to dance who could already dance, and that the future of Scottish country dancing lay with encouraging beginners. And the more I thought about that letter, and I came back to it many times, I realized how much of what we do and we say and the vocabulary we use plays to the people who already know what they're doing. And a lot of it doesn't play well to those new people who get so confused, and yet they are our future. And so that got me to thinking about recaps. Now, the gentleman in question here did not specifically mention recaps, but I think it's particularly true. When I hear recaps, I just can look at the newer dancers and see what confusion many of them have on their faces. So that's what led to this presentation. Just to emphasize, recapping dances is an essential skill for teachers and dance leaders, enabling the dancers, new and experienced, old and young, to enjoy social events. And I think that's so important. These recaps aren't just a procedure, they really matter to the dancers on the floor. Clearing up the vocabulary here, sometimes they're called briefings, sometimes they're called talk-throughs, but it's all the same thing. For many, many decades, and particularly emphasized in candidate classes, was this idea of brevity. This was the goal. That was the standard. When I was preparing this presentation, I mentioned it to a teaching and tutoring friend, and my friend said to me, just tell them, keep it short, 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 brief, brief, brief. That's all that matters. And that has been a standard. And of course, if you think about candidate classes, the candidates are studying the same dances for 2 weeks. They all know them backwards and forwards. So the recaps can be ultra brief. Here's a group of candidates looking over a dance and trying to figure out how to pare it down. I remember in 1974, Mrs. Gujar, my full certificate teacher, would, towards the end of the morning, have us all sit down, and one candidate at a time would get up and do a recap, and then everybody was to pull it apart and see what extra words there were. It was a useful exercise in a way, but the goal was strictly brevity. Curiously, no one asked then, that I'm aware of, what do dancers themselves really need from recaps? Back then, and I think even quite recently, there was a fundamental assumption that most everyone knew or should know, and there was a bit of moralistic quality to that. They should know the dances, and they just needed the briefest of refreshers, even though many people don't know the dances very well. So the agenda for this presentation is as follows. First, I'm going to talk a bit about how the Scottish country dance universe and the world at large have changed, and that necessitates changes in how we recap dances at classes, balls, and parties. Secondly, I'm going to make a series of suggestions for how to make recaps helpful. I'm sure many of you do some of these things already. And finally, for the naysayers, the doubters, who say, no, just keep them short, that's what matters, I have a few comments to them and then a wrap up. I'm going to begin this presentation with recapping what I hope is to many of you a familiar dance, the Duke of Perth, 3 different ways. And I'm not going to say anything in between the recaps. I might take a quick drink, but just I'll comment on the 3 recaps afterwards. First one. This is the Duke of Perth, 32-bar reel. First couple turn by the right, cast off, 2-step up. First couple turn to the left to face corners, turn corners and partner, set 2 and turn corners, and finish up with reels of 3, crossing over on 7 and 8. The Duke of Perth. Recap number 2. This is the Duke of Perth. And by the way, if you're from North America, you may say Perth. It's not Perth, it's Perth. The E and the R are kind of rolled together in that Scottish way. And it begins with the first couple turning by the, oh, I forgot. This is from book 1. This is one of those first 12 dances that Miss Milligan and Mrs. Stewart, the 2 co-founders of our society, put in the very first book. So it's kind of a really iconic dance. The first couple turn with right hands all the way around very, very quickly. And then they cast off. And the reason they have to turn so quickly is the 2s have to step up on 3 and 4. And if the first couple isn't out of the way, the 2s either have to step up off the music when the 1s finally get out of the way, or they have to wait and not step up when they're supposed to. So the 1s really have to turn quickly. And of course, they're going to use that shake hands grip that we always teach our classes. And then you're going to turn with the left hand, again, a shake hands grip, once and a half, to face your, well, actually it's not 1.5, is it? It's more like 1 3/8. Yeah, 1 3/8 to face your first corner. Remember, your first corners are the two people on the other side of the dance. The one on the right is your first corner. Give them a little wave. Good, yeah. And now the second corner is the one on the left. They give them a little wave too. So you're going to face your first corner, and you're going to be back to back with your partner, but don't be bumping your partner. Now, the next 8 bars is called turn corners and partner, but some people just call it corner partner. It's the same thing either way, and it's all done with skip change of step. And the first couples are going to turn that first corner with the right hand all the way around. It's very quick. And then they're going to turn each other in the middle with the left hand. Again, use that shake hands grip once and a bit. It's really fast there to face their second corners. And then the second corners will need to wake up, and the first couple is going to turn them with the right hand all the way around, and then the first couple turns their partner in the middle again back to face their first corner, so they're on that first corner diagonal back to back. Now the next formation is called set to and turn corners, and it's all done with Padabas. And if you're from Edinburgh, actually, it's not all done with Padabas, because if you're from Edinburgh, there was a teacher named Miss Allie Anderson who was quite insistent that the turns were done with skip change. So if you're an Edinburgh dancer, you set for 2 and then you turn with skip change. But we're going to do this the RSCDS way. So you're going to set to your first corner, and then putting the palms out, you're going to turn with 2 hands using Padabas all the way around to face your second corners. And don't cheat too much there now. And then you're going to set to your second corners, and you're going to turn them again with Padabas all the way around till you're between your corners, and the woman will be facing up on her partner's side and the man down on his partner's side, ready to give a left shoulder to their first corner for a reel of 3. I'm going to stop this recap at this point. I think you get the point. Recap number 3. This is the Duke of Perth, a 32-bar reel for 3 couples from Book 1. First couple turn quickly by the right and cast off as the 2 step up. They then turn left hands once and a bit to face first corners. They turn corners and partner and finish that back facing first corners. They then set to and turn corners, finishing between their corners, facing back towards first corners. And the dance finishes with 6-bar reels of 3 on the side of the dance, giving left shoulder to first corners, and the first couple crosses over on 7 and 8 with right hands, ready to repeat the dance, turn by the right and cast. The Duke of Perth. So those are the 3 recaps. The first one was very clipped, ultra brief, and it took a lot for granted. It was really a recap for the people who already knew that dance, and it was delivered quite rapidly. Again, hard for people who don't know a dance like that to process it. The second was chatty, disorganized, not well prepared, much too detailed, and it was more like someone trying to get in everything that's ever been said about that dance and those movements in a recap. And it certainly doesn't belong. That kind of recap just doesn't belong. You might think I was just being silly with that, but I once went to a ball and sat through, or stood through, I should say, a recap of Glasgow Highlanders that went on for 16 interminable minutes. And by then, no one was paying attention, and the dance did not go well because people just had lost their focus. The third recap, I hope, was helpful and had a little more information and was delivered in a way that would be possible for inexperienced dancers to get something from it. So let's move on. We are in a changing world, and the Scottish country dance community has changed from those old days, and the world at large has changed, and I think we have to respond to that. I want to talk about some of these changes and how they affect recapping. We can no longer take for granted that most dancers know a core of familiar and frequently done dances. Now, when I started dancing 40, 50 years ago, almost every week at these dances, we did the same things. We did the Duke of Perth and the Reel of the 51st Division, and we did Mari's Wedding and Hooper's Jig and Money Musk, and nobody complained that it was boring because we were doing the same dances. In fact, I think people enjoyed the familiarity of the dances because they could focus on the music and the people and just having fun enjoying the dances. These dances were just done over and over and much loved and much enjoyed. Occasionally a new dance would be introduced, but certainly no more than one per evening. Well-loved and familiar dances, that core group, seem to have been performed all over. I traveled a great deal as a young dancer, up to Toronto, out to Vancouver, down to the Asilomar weekend, Atlanta, Georgia, Fredericton, New Brunswick, Edinburgh, Inverness, Oban. And when I went to these places, there were those same dances. The Reel of the 51st, the Duke of Perth, Mari's Wedding, the White Heather Jig, Money Musk. It was very easy to go to other places because most people were doing a fairly familiar core of dances. Each place would seem to have one or two local favorites you'd have to study up. Whenever I went to Toronto, they did a dance that I'd never done anywhere else called the hunting horn. So I would have to study up on that, but it was only one dance. The familiarity of the dances meant that the MCs who were recapping could count on a fair amount of familiarity, and they could recap quite briefly, and in some cases, even skip the recaps. I want to just share an experience that happened a couple of years ago at Scottish Weekend. It's a big East Coast of the United States weekend that attracts a few from the UK and some from Canada and a lot of Americans. Big typical weekend with guest teachers and a ball and a ceilidh and all that. And at lunch, on the last day, the Sunday, I went around to 3 of the tables to ask 2 questions. I was preparing for this presentation, and there were about 12 to 15 people at each lunch table, and I asked these questions. I said, first of all, how many of you have danced the Duke of Perth? And to my surprise, about half the people raised their hands, which meant about half of them did not raise their hands. They didn't know that dance. They may have danced it and just didn't remember the name. And then I asked, how many of you at these tables, and I asked this 3 times, could do that dance, the Duke of Perth, without a recap? And there were a lot of teachers at the table. Total for all 3 tables, 2 hands went up. And that was a really surprising moment to me. It realized this dance that used to be on everybody's repertoire and everybody just knew it was not a familiar dance known by lots of people anymore. Today, many dancers and teachers insist on a much more varied program, a lot of novelty, a lot of new dances. When I go to a ball in an out-of-town location, I have to study and learn most of the dances, even though I have a pretty good memory and know a lot of the old chestnuts. Even in my own branch, I have to study and learn 2/3 to 3/4 of the dances for each ball. That's a real change, and it affects what we need in the recapping. The second change I want to speak about is the once familiar combinations like you see in blue there on the screen, set 2 and turn corners, followed by 6-bar left shoulder reels of 3. I remember my tutor, Mrs. Goodger, talking about the fact that this was just almost like one figure. Everybody knows this combination. And if you look at this list of dances that all have that combination, this is all from the RSCDS canon. Yet most of these dances don't get danced at all. Maybe a few groups do, Sleepy Maggie or Mrs. McLeod or the Braes of Tullamet, but most of these dances don't get danced. And so a lot of people don't know that combination as kind of an automatic, easy flow move. At a ball I attended recently, the Braes of Tullamet was on the program. Well, it wasn't recent, it was about 3 years ago. And the MC described the last 16 bars as you set 2 and turn corners, followed by the usual reel of 3 on the sides. And immediately there were actual calls from the dance floor, from dancers. Which reel? Is that a cross or up and down? What shoulder do you give? Is that a 6-bar reel? People wanted to know, and they didn't know, even though that is, again, what used to be thought of as a kind of iconic combination. Another change has to do with our beginners. Many beginning dancers now want and expect to come social dancing very soon after starting. They're ready to come to the balls and the parties when they're very new. That's a real change. When I started dancing in my branch and in many other branches I visited, it was generally expected that beginners would stay in a beginner's class for 2 or 3 years unless they happened to be a very quick study. And then only when their teacher tapped them would they get moved up to an intermediate class. And then after a year or two there, and again, only when their teacher tapped them and said, "You're ready," were they allowed to go social dancing. Today's dancers want to go social dancing right away. I was surprised. I announced a social dance event to my class, which had some very new dancers in it who'd had only 3 or 4 classes. And at the end of class, they all came rushing up. What do we wear? What do we bring for food? What time does it start? They absolutely expected to join in this dance and would have been shocked and dismayed if I said, "Oh no, you got to spend a couple of years learning this before you can come to a party." That's a real change. Another change is in the RSCDS itself. It's putting a lot more effort into marketing Scottish country dancing with focus on attracting new dancers. We all know membership is down. We have to attract new dancers, and we have to welcome them, and not just when they come in the door. We have to make sure the whole evening works well, so we retain new dancers by making sure their experience is positive. Nowadays, if you go to the RSCDS summer school, there are Ceilidh dances. That would have been unthinkable in Miss Milligan's day. She sort of thought of Ceilidh dancing as kind of a lower class thing. We don't do that. And now at summer school, sometimes people will walk through a dance while the recap is going on. Again, that just wouldn't have happened 30 years ago. It's not necessarily encouraged, but it's not frowned on, and no one shouts at them and says, "Don't do that." Summer school is now much more community-minded and less clubby and cliquish. So there's this effort on bringing people in. And that's why, on that night I referenced earlier, there were a lot of relatively inexperienced dancers from all over the world who'd come to St. Andrews to the summer school. And they didn't feel they had to be expert before they came. And that changes the experience level on the dance floor, which in turn changes what we need from our MCs. Excuse me, I'm going to take a quick drink here. Another change is the competition. In North America, we have hugely popular contra dancing, which draws enormous crowds of particularly young people, but all ages, particularly on the East Coast, but really all over North America. And in the UK, there's a tremendous emphasis on reeling. This is a picture from London. Big crowds, lots of people dressed up, having a wonderful time. And Ceilidh dancing, again, attracts big crowds. Well, these brand new Ceilidh dancers and reelers and contra dancers can expect to do 8 to 10 or more dances on their very first night, even though they don't know what they're doing. And they aren't expected to have to spend long periods in classes. Well, when they come and try out Scottish country dancing, they want to have that same kind of fun. And they don't want to be put off for years and years before they're allowed to attend the fun events. Another change, and I'm just going to read this one straight up. Most of today's dancers, but especially the young people, are immensely busy people, many doing multiple kinds of dancing. They don't have the time or inclination to spend hours studying crib notes or dance diagrams just to go to a dance party on a Saturday evening or a Sunday afternoon. They want and expect MCs to give them enough help in the recaps so they can enjoy the dancing. Now, it is true that if there's a ball, many people will study in advance. But just for a regular dance party, people want help from the MCs for that. Another change, and this is a real change in the RSCDS, I think, most of today's dancers are less worried about making mistakes than earlier generations. Our teaching is less top-down, less focused on picking out faults. I remember how upset Miss Milligan would get when she saw someone with a 2-beat pas de basque and how that person would be called out even in public. Today's dancers just want to get in there and do it. They want to have a good time. Mistakes are part of the learning. In my own class, for example, I have quite a few beginners. I have one who, whenever she makes a mistake, goes, "Oh, sorry." But the rest of them just kind of smile and laugh when they make mistakes. It doesn't worry them so much. So they're quite happy to come social dancing, even though they may not be very proficient yet. And a good reminder for all of us teachers that mistakes are part of the learning process. Another change I want to reference is the availability of crib notes and pilling diagrams. Crib notes seen below, diagrams off to the right here. They're easily available online. MCs often assume that because these are available, dancers have studied them. They're arriving having looked at these things. But there's two fallacies in here. First of all, many people just don't. They don't bother. And newer and less experienced dancers find them very difficult to understand and learn from. The instructions down below make a great deal of sense to probably the people in this audience who are teachers. But the dancers in my class, they, find cross with the right hand's across, rights and lefts. They all sound very much alike. And those words don't necessarily evoke what they do to an experienced dancer. And the diagrams, which are very helpful to some people, are utterly confusing to many other dancers. And I particularly want to emphasize, I skipped here, that the TAC is our next presentation of this type. It's another webinar. It's going to be on February 28th, given by Sharon Barker of Calgary, will be about using diagrams and how they work, how to use them and read them and interpret and learn from them and their limitations. And so if that's a topic you're interested in or people in your group are interested in, mark your calendars for February 28th. I'm sure Sharon will have a very good presentation. The final change I want to refer to is the need and the importance of attracting young people. Here in the Delaware Valley branch, we have a lot of young people. We have a class at Bryn Mawr College. It's been going for more than 50 years, where the students actually get PE credit for learning Scottish country dancing. And we have a relatively new class downtown in Center City, Philadelphia, which our amazing Adrian Valonis has organized using strictly social media as a way of publicizing. It attracts a lot of young people. And they are now beginning to come to many other branch events. They are alert at night, unlike some of the rest of us who get a little tired as the evening wears on. They are immensely energetic, and if the dance calls for one turn, they want to go around twice in that space of time. They are enthusiastic, and sometimes at the end of a dance, when everyone else is ready for the waltz, they want to do that last dance, not once and to the bottom, but all the way through again. They're so enthusiastic. It's just wonderful to have that energy. And they're quick to learn. But I want to share an interesting anecdote with you about these young people and about recaps. Last year, at one of our early social dances, about 2.5 sets of new dancers came from that Bryn Mawr College class. They were very pumped and they were very new. The MC on that particular night is someone who talks rather quickly and gives very brief recaps. No walkthroughs were allowed. And a lot of chaos ensued. And I wasn't there that night because I was something else, and I didn't know about this, but I was the MC for the next month. And 5 of the young people came to the next dance, as well as some folks from the Philly class, the Philadelphia class. I saw quite a few new faces, and I said I would walk each dance once through and then recap it. And at the end of the first dance, one of the Bryn Mawr College dancers, who was kind of a mover and shaker and organizer, she said, "Are you going to do that for every dance?" And I thought, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. They're going to complain. And I said, well, I had planned to. And she said, well, if I had known that, I could have brought 2.5 sets more dancers tonight. And she told me what had happened the previous month and how the young people had come and really been quite lost and confused and had been very chaotic, and they'd been kind of discouraged. And she said that, just having a walkthrough and a recap, a full recap, was all they needed. And so even these young people who are so quick to learn, they want more help from their MCs than just a quick whip through of a dance. Which brings us to the second part of this, although I want to kind of summarize the first part. We have a real impact from all these changes. We have so many new dances and so many new formations, and no longer a strong core that everybody knows. Us older teachers know them, or we older teachers, but a lot of the younger people and the newer people don't. We have busy people who don't have long hours to study just to go to a party. We have the expectation of going to parties early on in their dancing. We have the experience of other lively, fun dance styles competing with us. And if we don't compete successfully, we're going to lose everyone to contra dancing and English country dancing and Cayley dancing. The willingness to get in there and just dance, that's a real change. People are less worried about messing up. They're happy to go to a social dance, even if they don't know much about how to do it. So we need recaps that are helpful, that have useful information, are relatively brief. We don't want those long chatty things, that are delivered thoughtfully, that support newer dancers, that take into account that older dancers, even if they're experienced, can easily forget, especially as the evening wears on, and recaps that enable all levels of dancers to succeed and have an enjoyable time dancing. They shouldn't be mostly aimed at the in crowd. So now I'm moving to the second part of this presentation with 13 tips for making the recaps more helpful. 4 of them are procedural, as in how we do the recaps, and 9 are substantive, what we include in the recaps. So I'm going to get right into these now. The first tip, and these are the procedural ones, speak slowly. Many MCs talk quickly. They themselves know the dance so well. They've done it for years. It's just right on the top of their head, tip of their tongue. But new dancers and older dancers need time to translate words into movement images. Scottish country dancing is one of the few types of dances where people are just supposed to learn movement from words. Most other dance forms do not rely on a lot of words. They rely mostly on demonstration. And so if people are going to get help from words, we need to talk slowly so people can process that. And just rattling it off quickly because everyone knows it, when in fact everyone doesn't know it, is a real problem. Second thing, insert brief pauses while dancers process what you've said. It takes a few moments, maybe a half of a second to a second, to take those words and make meaning out of them. So in the Duke of Paris, first couple turn by the right hand, cast off a place as the 2 step up, and then turn by the left hand once and a bit to face first corners. Little pause there. Why? Well, nowadays, many people dance on unfamiliar sides of the set. I'm often on the ladies' side because that's where the numbers fall out. And I have to just briefly think, where's my corner this time? I don't need a long time, but little pauses help people make meaning out of our recaps. The third tip is to use your hands and make big gestures and show what you are saying. A few years ago, when the TAC summer school was in Halifax, Nova Scotia, I was the MC for the Sunday night welcome dance. And people had been driving all day or flying, and it was kind of just an adjustment to dancing. And I noticed about 8 or 10 dancers early on watching me because I use my hands a lot when I talk. Cross, cast off, I use gestures. And by the last dance before the break, I was aware that almost the entire gym full of dancers at summer school were turning 90 degrees, not looking at their partner, but were turning and watching the MC. And they were watching me not because I was a thing of great beauty, but because I was giving them pictures with my hands of what to do. And that was helping the dancers learn. Many dancers will mimic your gestures. So while you're saying cross with the right hand, they're also doing cross with the right hand, cast off, they're doing that. And that's a way to help them learn. I think we completely need to forget and do away with that old standing stiff MC model. Years ago, my wife and I prepared a group of teacher candidates, and we encouraged them and taught them how to use their hands effectively when they were recapping. And during the debrief with the examiners that we had as tutors, the examiner, who shall be nameless, said, "Well, the recaps were all right, but why did you have them flapping their hands around that way?" And of course, you don't argue with your examiners, but the fact was that they were giving helpful gestures. But this was someone who felt that the MC should stand very stiffly and just deliver the words. Interestingly, that same examiner critiqued quite correctly one of our dancers for having the class, one of the candidates for having the class do a formation without a demonstration. So demonstration was considered very important. Using your hands in a recap is a form of demonstration. When the words don't help, sometimes the hands do. And finally, I've been emceeing and recapping for 55 plus years. And I can tell you I've been watching MCs and listening to recaps, and active MCs get better results. And by better results, I mean more successful dancing going on the dance floor than people who stand stiffly and just say the words. The last tip is to study your dances, clarify, practice and practice. Know every part of your dance and how to describe it, okay? Not just a general familiarity with it, but know exactly how you're going to say each part. Use standard terminology. Teapots may be common in this class here or that group over there, but you may have people from out of town or visitors. Use terms that everyone knows. Use original sources so you know the dances are correct. When I put together a set of crib notes for a program I'm doing, I go to the internet like most people. But I find I have to read each dance very carefully, and I have to make multiple corrections because those crib notes are not always correct. So start with an original and correct source, and then, sure, you can cut and paste from the internet, but make sure they're correct. I don't just assemble a program of lists of crib notes. I go through and I edit them to make sure they reflect how the dance actually goes. Leave out the asides, the jokes, the stories, and all that humor. The in-crowd will love it and they'll think you're just a charming MC. But the newer, the less experienced people, the people that Mr. Carswell referenced in his letter, those beginners, they're listening for how to do the dance, what hand to give, how the turn goes, and don't interfere with all that by putting in your stories and anecdotes. Save them for the Kaylee or the after party. And finally, practice for seamless recapping. As I say, I've been recapping for 55 plus years. I still take a program I'm going to do, and I recap every dance out loud, probably 8 or 10 times in the weeks leading up to it, so the recaps are smooth and clear and coherent. So those are the procedural suggestions I have. Now I'm moving on to the content of what we put in our recaps. First of all, I put extra emphasis on, and I even repeat, directions for movements that are unexpected or different from the usual. Most dancers, once they start a formation, just do it the way they learned it originally, kind of the basic default or autopilot version. And many dances are just that way until something is different. So, for example, in the Scotia Suite, Bruce's Men, a lovely Roy Goldring Strespé for 3 couples, it finishes with a 3-couple allemande. And the first couple's in second place at the beginning and end of that. But instead of retiring on 7 and 8, first couple casts to the bottom, and the third couple at the bottom dances up to second place. That's an unusual ending for an allemande, and even when you say that in the recap, many people just out of habit retire. So when I finish the recap, I just say again, remember, the end of the allemande, 1's cast, 3's dance up. Takes maybe 4 seconds to add to that, and it helps people. Or in the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh from Book 39, a dance that many of us know from its earlier leaflet iteration, it begins with 3 couples advancing and retiring, and then all turning with skip change of step, but a 2-handed turn. And people are so used to using right hands for a skip change turn or left hands that many people forget to use that 2 hands. So I say that very carefully. All couples turn partners with skip change, but using a 2-handed turn. And then I put in a little pause so that sinks in. Tip number 2, particularly quick or slow phrasing requires emphasis and sometimes the giving of landmarks. Very few people actually listen to recaps analytically. What most people do is listen for what's the next thing, what comes after what is the order of the formations, but they don't always listen for the phrasing that might be tucked in there and sometimes isn't mentioned. In that same dance, the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh, and there they are, the late Duke and the late Queen, who were the Duke and Duchess of Edinburgh. In the second 8 bars, it's a figure of 8 on the sides of the dance, and it's a very quick one. It's really 10 bars of dancing in 8 bars. And so I either describe it, if it's a fairly experienced group, as a quick figure of 8, or tells the first couple to be back at the end of their figure of 8 by the end of bar 6, so they're ready to cast off on 7 and 8. That's what makes it 10 bars of dancing in 8 bars. If you just say a figure of 8 and cast off at the end, people will kind of dance at the normal speed and miss that. A third very helpful thing is to link formations together. I've been at so many dances where an MC will say, first couple lead down the middle and back, and then first and second couples change places with poussette. And even experienced dancers and teachers will lead down and back to place, and then suddenly realize there's a poussette and dive in for it. It looks pretty awful. Whereas if you say, finish in the middle, ready for a poussette with the 2 stepping, or ready for an allemande, you get much better results. And sometimes the connections are even more tricky than that. There's a dance from book 30, Call a Cure. It's fairly popular here in North America. In the third 8 bars of this jig, the first couple does a reel of 3 across the dance. Woman up with the 2s, man down around with the 3s. But they finish that facing out the women's side, man above the woman. They're side by side there in between the second and third woman. If you just say that, chaos results. But if you say in your recap that the first man must speed up the end of his reel and dance across the dance to finish just below second woman, and first woman must speed up her reel starting on bar 5 and make a wide arc that curves down by third woman, pulling back by the right at the end, you're much more likely to have the first couple side by side ready for the next formation. So link your formations and give those little bits of helpful information that allow dancers to glue it together. Fourth tip concerns reels of 3. In the old days, back in the early days of the society, there were about 8 common reels of 3. There were mirror-wise and parallel reels of 3 from the top of the dance, and there were mirror-wise and parallel crossover reels like West Hornpipe and Cadgers. And there were right and left shoulder reels across the dance, usually woman with the 2s, man with the 3s, but sometimes the other way around. And finally, there were the 6-bar reels of 3 on the opposite side after corner formations. There were other reels, but those were the main ones, and they occurred many times, so people knew them very well. Nowadays, we have half reels, reels in promenade hold, tandem reels, diagonal reels, dolphin reels, Schiehallion reels, Celtic reels, circular reels. The list goes on and on. So it's not surprising that a lot of people get confused with reels. So there are 3 elements I always include in every recap. The first is the number of bars of the reel. It's usually 6 or 8 bars for a whole reel and 3 or 4 bars for the half reels. Second, what's the orientation of the reel? Is it up or down? Is it across the dance? Is it on the diagonal? Or I guess you could even say around the circle, because some are like that. But if you tell people that in your recap, that helps so many people. And finally, who initiates the reel and which shoulder is passed? With those pieces of information, many people do a lot better. Then there are other elements here. How you get into some reels is tricky, and how you get out of them. So, for example, in Book 29 is a lovely dance, Bros or John, again, quite popular here in North America. And the last 8 bars of the dance, you'll see is a reels of 3 across the dance. First woman giving right shoulder to second woman, and first man giving right shoulder to third man. But what precedes that are 2 crossover reels from the bottom of the dance. And at the end of that second crossover reel, the first couple turns with the right hand, and it's a very fast turn. But if they do that, they will be in third place, and the first man will be able to enter his reel very easily with the third couple, but the woman will be miles away from the second couple where she needs to enter her reel. So as an MC, I link that by saying, Finish the reel quickly with a turn by the right, moving up the dance, so that the first man is facing third man and the first woman facing second woman. And that makes such a difference if you give people the entry when it's a difficult entry for a reel. Similarly, some reels end in unusual ways. Gates of Edinburgh is also still quite a popular dance, and it used to be a candidate dance. It begins with mirror-wise crossover reels, but if you look carefully at the dance, at the end of the second crossover reel, the first man must be in third place facing up between the threes and the woman between the twos. It's pretty easy for the woman to get where she's going, but the first man has a long journey from top place to get down to third place. So when I recap, I don't just say where to finish. I suggest, first man, finish your reel by bar 6 and then dance down, pulling back by the right to finish between the third couple. That helps people. So when we help people get in and out of reels, the dancing goes much more smoothly. Another transition, and I particularly want to mention this one because when I gave this presentation at summer school, 3 different teachers came up and said this had never occurred to them. When there is a tricky transition from one repetition of a dance to the next repetition, not the dance itself, but how you get from the first repetition into the next, that often is the problem area in a dance. Now, many dances are very straightforward and there's no need for any comment. You take something like the machine without horses. First couple finishes in third place. They're doing rights and lefts with the couple above them. They step to the bottom. The 4s step up. If they forget, someone will give them a nod. And they'll be ready by bar 5 to do right hands across with the new first couple. But if you think of a dance like Maxwell's Rant or Strathclyde's House, those 2 dances require the 4th couple to instantly begin the dance as a third couple from 4th place. Now, in Maxwell's Rant, many people, especially newer dancers, turn by the right at the very end of the dance and they stop because they're used to stopping at the end of a repetition unless they're the first couple. And they don't realize that they're now the third couple and they have to dance up the reel, up the set into the reel. And some, because they've been taught to step up first, and by the time they get into third place, they've already missed their position in the reel. So I encourage people to dance up from the bottom at the beginning of the next reel while the old ones step to the bottom. And interestingly, Strathclyde's House, it's a lovely old strathspey, and it begins with 3 couples setting and then circling halfway around. And it's really nice to have all the couples in place at that setting. So the previous 8 bars of the dance, the last 8 bars, the first couple's in second place, crossed over. And they advance and retire and turn 1.5 times with 2 hands back to their own side. But when I recap that and when I dance it myself, I encourage people to turn to the bottom. And then the 4s can step up. And then that next repetition will begin seamlessly with 1, 2s, and 3s ready to set and circle. Those are the kinds of hints that an MC can give that will make the transition from one repetition to the next smooth rather than looking like the usual proverbial ants under a rock scene. Number 6, MCs can give an extra reminder for problem moments that frequently break down. I think almost every branch and every group has some dances that do, and one of those dances is a spot where people go blank. In this branch, one of the places that happens is, again, that lovely Strathspey by Roy Goldring, Bruce's Men. The second 8 bars of the dance is a diagonal rights and lefts. And when people finish that, they just sort of go blank. And what follows is a figure of 8 across the dance, man down, lady up for the first couple alone. And even when I'm the person who emceed it and recapped it, I sometimes stand there blank. And I see sets all over the place who heard the recap and just stand there. So knowing in advance that that's a problem moment. When I recap, I say, remember, after that diagonal rights and lefts, first couple dance a half figure of 8 across, lady up, man down. And that little second reminder helps. And when I do that, very few people forget. So look for those dances in your group where there tend to be those funny moments where people just go blank, and put a little reminder in there. Idea number 7. For very infrequently done and tricky formations like tourbillon, tournée, I usually give dancers the start. I do not think it's a good idea to try to teach those figures from the microphone or the front of the room. First of all, it's not going to work. And secondly, it's going to take a very long time. But if these figures are on the program, there's a good chance that people have learned them in class in the weeks preceding, but they may not have the movements and the name linked together. So if it's a tourbillon, I remind people of the first bar. And by giving them just that little starter, it helps a lot of people get into it, and it brings back from what they've learned earlier or when they've danced it before. Oh, it's that one. Because we don't do those formations often enough to have it be as automatic as rights and lefts. Idea number 8. For longer or busy dances with lots of phrasing and where lots is happening, it really helps to identify the start of each 8-bar phrase. For example, in the New Rig Chip, it's a lovely 48-bar jig from Book 9, but it's 6 figures long, and that's more than most dances. And it begins with the first 2 couples dancing 4 hands around and back. And then I say, second 8 bars. First couple dance right shoulder reels of 3 on own sides. Then I put up the fingers. Third 8 bars. First couple lead down the middle and back to places. And one thing I'll notice when I do that is people start physically keeping track on their fingers because that helps them remember the dance. And you can also do that with a 32-bar dance that has lots of 4-bar phrases. Give people the sequence and let them kind of keep count of what happens. It's hard to remember all of that. And the last suggestion, and there are certainly many other things one could say, I've just picked out 9 that I think are particularly important, is to use adverbs to clarify the speed of turns. Many dancers just don't complete the turns in a timely way, or they finish them way too soon, and that creates awkward moments for everybody. In the Breza Bredalben from Book 21, the third 8 bars, you take hands on the side and set for 4 bars, and then you turn for 4 bars. And interestingly, some people finish that turn in 2 bars or 2.5 bars, and then they stand on the side wondering, and then the people still in the middle begin to wonder if maybe they're doing it wrong. But if you say, turn slowly with both hands for 4 bars, you've maybe added 1 second to your recap, but you've given important information. Similarly, with the Duke of Paris, and I've already referenced this moment, you say turn quickly with right hands, and that gets most of the ones out of the way. You don't need to give a long speech about why you need to turn quickly. But just using adverbs helps the dancers get a sense of how to phrase and put it all together. So now I have a kind of rhetorical question. Will making our recaps more helpful mean lots more talking, endless standing around, and less dancing? This teacher doesn't think so. I did a test run of the Delaware Valley Branch's March 2025 social dance program. My friend Melissa Shaner prepared the program. It was a lovely program. She always writes good ones. And I sat down after I actually danced the program, and first of all, I learned all the dances, and then I set a stopwatch here at my computer, and I recapped all dances in that clipped, rapid way with no helpful hints, just bing, 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 one after another, the way I did the first Duke of Perth one. Then I turned off the stopwatch, wrote down the time, and got up and had a drink, walked around, sat down, and I did it again with somewhat slower recaps with little pauses and a few helpful tips for each dance. Notice I've underlined a few, not a lot. You might wonder, what was the total time difference in the 2 ways of recapping those programs? Well, it was 3 minutes and 42 seconds was the time difference. 3 minutes and 42 seconds. So if your dance was supposed to get over at 10 o'clock, might get out at 10:04, 10:05, that's not a lot of time for a lot of help for a lot of your dancers. And I think it's worth it. I think it's worth it because as we need to bring in our beginners, need to get more people comfortable, need to make our older dancers feel more comfortable and not so worried as the evening wears on, as their memories begin to fade. I just think it's worth it. And now I want to ask this question. If you're a teacher and you know all the dances anyhow, what do you get for your 3 minutes and 42 seconds? Are there any benefits for you who don't need these recaps? The first one is that there are going to be fewer times when someone's going to get into your set at a ball or party, and they're going to say, oh, good, there's a teacher here. He'll get us through. I have no idea how this dance goes. I have that happen to me all the time, particularly at the TAC summer school. People know me as a teacher. And, oh, good, there's a teacher here. He'll get us through. And people really kind of expect that that's what a teacher's there for. Even if I'm off duty that night, even if I'm just at a dance party, just as a private citizen, just to have fun myself. I think it would still happen if the recaps were more helpful, but I'm betting it would happen a lot less frequently if we make our recaps helpful rather than ultra brief. Second benefit, I think there's going to be less chaos on the dance floor and more sets where things are working well. It's fun for all of us, including us teachers, to dance in sets where things are working well, where people are succeeding. I don't particularly enjoy being in a set where everything's chaotic. So when the recaps are more helpful, there's going to be a larger number of dances where things go well and smoothly and where it's satisfying for everybody in the set. Third benefit, retention is a big issue for RSCDS branches and dance groups. Many of us in our groups have taster nights or try Scottish dancing nights, and people do come. But how many people come back? And how many take up the activity? I'm not suggesting that the quality of our recaps will completely solve the retention issue, but helpful recaps enable dancers to succeed. And they're much more likely to come back to your dance and to your class if they have succeeded. So there's a real benefit in retention. And finally, the benefits of attracting new dancers. We all know that membership is down. Recently, some RSCDS branches could not have their AGM. They lacked a quorum of dancers. All of our groups are looking for new dancers, and many are looking for younger dancers. Helpful recaps are going to help dancers to have a good time. If people have a really good time at your dance or your class, they're much more likely to go to a friend, a neighbor, a relative, a spouse, a partner, a colleague at work and say, oh, you really ought to come Scottish country dancing. It's really fun. We all benefit from these helpful recaps. And the more fun people have, the more people are going to be joining us. So this is where I'm going to wrap up with this final thought. I, just like I'm sure all of you, have no desire to stand around listening to long, detailed, chatty recaps like the second one I did earlier on. I'm perfectly happy, though, to listen to slower, carefully orchestrated, practiced, and focused recaps that remind all the dancers of important details that might cause them problems. Right now, my memory is good enough that I don't really need to listen to the recaps all that carefully, but as I get older, I am sure I'm going to start needing those reminders myself, and I'll be very glad when MCs put those little hints and those linkages in. So I hope you found this helpful, and now I'm going to turn it back to Ward and Deborah, who, if there are any questions or comments, I'll do my best to talk about them.
Well, thank you, Geoffrey. You have not disappointed us at all. This is great and very helpful. And we do have one that was brought up by Ellie, and she asked if you've looked at Campbell Tyler's list of frequently done dances to see which ones are most likely to be known.
I have. I've only once looked at it, but yes, I have.
Okay. And we've several comments here about endorsing your idea of putting pauses in between phrases.
Was there a question around that, or is just have I looked at that?
That was it. I read it pretty much verbatim.
Okay.
Maybe Ellie wants to unmute and.
I just wondered if you looked at it and saw how far down Duke of Perth is.
Yes. But there are so many groups that have their own favorites now that it's harder to travel. You got to study.
I see a comment here from James. It says he wants to add that if the dancers walk through the dance as it is being briefed, things go much better. And I know that I find that as well in our groups now, that a quick walkthrough solves a lot of problems.
Yeah, let me comment on that. First of all, I agree with that. And I now see that that's done at the TAC Summer School, and it's done in most of our dances in this branch and many other places I go. I think it's great. It upsets a few people, especially some old school folks who say, we didn't used to do that, but we didn't used to have such an enormous repertoire that would be featured on these programs. I didn't include that in this presentation just because to me that's a whole different talk, and I do have some thoughts about how to make sure those walkthroughs don't turn into teaching sessions, which sometimes they do. And so I just omitted that from this on purpose and just stuck with the recap part of it. But I do agree, when there are people for whom those words just don't communicate very much. And yet when they see it, either walking it themselves or someone else in their set walking, it just means so much more. And again, that means the set is successful. And even the people who already knew the dance and didn't need to walk it and maybe even roll their eyes that, oh God, we don't need to walk that. Everybody knows that. Well, in fact, everybody doesn't know that. It makes the dance go better for them too. Anything else?
I just saw a lot of comments and a lot of people saying thank you. Any thoughts about gender-free recapping?
Ah, well, woo, open the can of worms. Yes, I have a lot of thoughts. I didn't put them into this presentation simply because that's a whole different topic and I think it needs to be addressed. And I have some friends who I think will address it could address it even better than myself. We do completely gender-free teaching and recapping here in the Delaware Valley branch with occasional mess ups, myself included on it. Just when you've done something for 50 some years one way, there are some things that just kind of fall out of you that if I'm in the middle of a particular dance and someone's lost, I say, ladies chain, it just comes out. But I do think it's the way of the future. And it turns out not to be nearly as hard to pull off. I thought it was going to be a really difficult change. I know that most of our classes are thrilled with it. And I know particularly that the young people, who we all need to attract because they're the next generation of Scottish country dancers, feel so strongly about it that some of them won't come to a dance if it's not being done. And I know there's some people who are vehemently against it. And this is not the place for me to take up that particular argument, but I just think it's what's coming, and it's going to come up in more places, and more people are going to get comfortable with it. And I think it'll just evolve into place eventually. That's my expectation. But I deliberately did not take that one up for this presentation just because I was thinking about just the mechanics of how do people get through the dances. And that I think is another topic.
Right. There a couple more questions have popped up as we've gone along
Okay.
here. Anjana, I'm sorry if I've mispronounced it.
Anjana, it's pronounced Anjana.
She's asking if you can comment on how many bars of the first phrase we should repeat at the end of the recap. One of their fellow dancers prefers the first 4 bars only, but they tend to say the whole first phrase and with ready to begin.
That's an interesting one. I've never thought about that. It is pretty common now to repeat that first 8 bars because a lot of people hear the recap and then just how's it start? They say. I get that in sets all the time when I'm there. People go, how's it start again? Even though they were listening and maybe even walked it, they just go blank. I think it depends more on the dance itself. Sometimes some dances, are very busy in the first 8 bars. If that dance I referenced earlier, the new rigged ship, it would be very odd to say it begins 4 hands around and not say 4 hands around and back. But that's the whole 8 bars. So I think it depends more on the dance and perhaps a bit on the crowd too.
Yeah.
But even if there's a lot of stuff in the first 8 bars, I try to leave out, for example, if it was the Duke of Perth, I might just say, first couple, turn by the right and cast, turn by the left to corners. So I'm not saying 2 step up and 3 and 4. I'm not saying turn once in a bit. I'm just giving them the overview of it.
Okay. Oh, lots of questions popping up. Um, James asks, any thoughts about having a non-exact number of dancers for a 4 couple set? Would you make the ninth person sit down?
Ah, that's another whole topic, inclusion. It's an interesting one. Um, as an MC, and that's more of an MCing rather than a recapping question, but I'll weigh in, and I think it's really important to be as inclusive as possible. There's a lot of solutions to it. One I often do, if I see someone, is I'll just do one repetition of the dance and give the person my next turn. That's one thing I can do. Sometimes we, have a fifth couple and we have the bottom, if it's a stress bay, we have the bottom 2 couples, each split a turn. And I've never heard someone say, oh, I got cheated. I know that people say, oh, people are going to complain. I've never seen that actually happen. I've seen people only too happy to share it because it means more people are included. And I think most Scottish country dancers are people with big hearts who want everyone to have a good time, not just themselves. I've also seen just various substitute situations. We have live music, so we often say, "Can you play it 10 times through?" And they always say yes. We don't do that with stress bays, but we do it with quick times. Can you play it 10 times through? And they're happy to. Sometimes I'll just say, "Okay." This person starts, they'll dance the dance once as the ones, let them be a fourth and a third couple and then come in and, take their place so you can be part of the dance. That particularly works for a dance like Maxwell's Rant, where everybody does pretty much everything. Some of these dances where the twos and threes dance a lot. Then there's no reason you don't have to do the first couple part to get to participate. So I think there are ways to get it more inclusive. And, people, they come and they want to dance, and I want them to dance.
Okay. Kay Sutherland asks, do you agree with marking some dances on a program as only for experienced dancers?
Depends on the program. I would think maybe at a ball, that would be a good thing. And, I think that also depends on the type of repertoire a particular group does. If it's going to be done, I think it should be done very sparingly. And that's because I think there shouldn't be a lot of difficult dances on programs unless the group coming is all experienced. I'm kind of old school about that. I feel like our programs should be mostly dances that people can do and enjoy without a lot of thinking and studying and worrying about it. Maybe in an advanced class you can do those more challenging dances, but I just think that when they appear heavily on kind of weighting a program, it really skews things towards the in crowd and leaves people either out altogether or feeling bad because they messed up so badly.
That's all I see about questions.
Let me thank you again, Geoffrey, for an excellent presentation. Obviously, a lot of interest. I heard from a number of people who regretted that they could not attend and wanted to make sure that we were recording something that could be posted. That will be the case. I also refer you to the TAC YouTube channel of really excellent presentations, including Ron Wallace, a forum on mixed level classes, Elka Baker's History of Scottish Country Dance Music, Cecily Selling's Memory and Scottish Country Dance, which has gotten over 400 views, Marjorie McLaughlin's presentation on devising dance programs, and then Ron Wallace, another excellent presentation on music for Scottish country dancing. And I will also, putting on my chairman's hat, if you're not currently a member of TAC, I would encourage you to consider joining us. Your membership helps the organization and we would like to be able to do more of these sorts of presentations, and we plan to do more of these presentations. So with that final plug, again, thank you all for attending. Thank you, Geoffrey. Excellent presentation. And I hope to see you on the dance floor in the future. Thank you all.